but this is just to demonstrate how you can create the beams in Maestro if you wanted to do it there instead of in Rhino. So actually, I'm going to start off with a fresh version of the hull here. I'll just open a new one, and what I'm going to do is import just the polygon mesh. And we'll just import, let's say, the decks. Now for the hull, you'll probably want to use the export script because you can use the normals from the mesh. But here we just imported our decks with no beams. And for purposes of making it a little clearer, I'll put a cutting plane in there so we can only see the main deck here. Now, a feature that I guess Ming had added probably a year ago or so is in the nodal dialog, similar to how we would normally create a beam. Well, first we'll need to have a beam type. Right now we only have the null beam type, so we'll go into the library, AISC shapes, and we'll just grab any beam so that we have something available. To create a standard beam, we go into the beam dialog. X is our current part, so we'll create a new beam, select two nodes and the beam property and a direction, which we'll set to 0, -1, 0, so it's pointing down. We create the beam, and now we have that one beam segment. Now that's a lot of clicks if you wanted to create each beam individually, so we can go into the nodal dialog and we can select a whole series of nodes across the deck. But again, this is a fair amount of clicks. And I missed one there, so we get them in order. And then we just say create beams, and it'll replicate whatever the last beam that was created. It'll continue making copies of that on all of the nodes that we selected. But an even easier way when you're doing bulk creation, but with a little less control, because you can't control the extents where it's going to create these, would be to use the create multiple beams. And this can also be used for rods and other things. But we'll go in here and we'll just select some seed points. And you can say create multiple beams on these seed points. And we'll say we want to create a beam. Our beam direction is going to be -y because we want it pointing down. The element direction, essentially the direction from that seed point, the direction we want the beam to propagate will be in the Z direction. We want it to go transversely, and you can set an angular tolerance so that if it hits if you want it to be in a very straight line with no deviations, you can set that angle tolerance to 1. It would work just fine here because we know these are perfectly straight. Or if there's a little variation in your mesh, you can increase the angle tolerance. And then we'll just select what beam we want to actually create, and then just say create, and it will create all of those beams. Now that can be very handy for putting in your frames along the length of the hull. And similarly, we could have put in stiffeners by just changing the element direction. That's a fairly quick way to put the beams on the deck if you prefer modeling them in Maestro rather than doing the polylines and export script in Rhino. I just wanted to make sure you had that as an option for when you're deciding on how you want to go about building.